Hi everyone, it's my pleasure to be here and to see so many of you. I'll do my best to talk a bit about how we have worked around the city, around the world with different cities in relation to climate resilience, with a focus on water, but know that we work integrated across all hazards. To start with, I just wanted to pause a little bit of this notion of climate resilience. We often talk about climate adaptation, climate hazards, climate resilience. When we talk about resilience, we are talking about the ability of a system to maintain function, reorganize, or adapt in the face of change, meaning that we are talking about systems change, so we are not talking about individual static infrastructure or parts or simple problems. We're talking about very complex issues. So we all have to activate our systems thinking, and I think that's also why you're here today. You know this is a complex issue that demand many different stakeholders and many different disciplines to come together. I will talk a lot about water, and that is because 9 out of 10 climate-related events are actually water-related, and they cascade through food systems, supply chains. No company anywhere in the world can operate without water, even if they don't actually have any water features in their products or in their services. We need drinking water, we need sanitation, we all operate in local water cycles. So water is fundamental to life. When we talk about climate resilience in relation to water, we often talk about too little water, so no access to drinking water or droughts, crops dry out. We also talk a lot about too much water, so flooding, or too contaminated water. A lot of our work in relation to climate resilience relate to too much water. And when we talk about flooding, it can happen from very different complex drivers. Often we talk about water from above or flooding from above. This is rainwater-driven flooding, flash floods. You know, it can rain in one part of the city and it didn't rain in the other part of the city, and all of a sudden it floods somewhere and is very dry somewhere else. We also talk about flooding from the side. This can be rivers overflowing, storm surge from the sea, lakes. And then we talk about flooding from below. In some areas we have rising groundwater tables or seas pressuring in. Many communities will experience a mix of all these flood drivers. As I said, it's a complex world, but actually water makes it a little bit more complex, because water flows, transforms, evaporates, it's always in motion, it's always becoming something else. So the idea that we can sort of simplify working with water is actually an outdated understanding of working with this foundation of life. It means that we can't just rely on engineering anymore. We also need landscape architects, we need planners, anthropologists, you name it. It is really having everyone come together. And I brought in this quote by Erika Gies. She says, "The idea that we can control water has always been a fantasy." And I kind of like this quote because for decades we've been controlling water, putting streams down into pipes, channeling our rivers into concrete canals, etc. And actually, we can't control water. So we're increasing our own vulnerabilities as we try to control water, because eventually it will flow, overflow, and then actually what we put in place gave us a false sense of security rather than actually adapt us to a changing climate. So we have teams that used to build dams and now they're contract to decommission dams. So we do see a trend shifting in actually daylighting streams, decomposing dams, and naturalizing entire water systems. In Ramboll Water, this is really where we start. We have over 50 colleagues just doing hydraulic modeling every single day. They model down to the tiny details of infrastructure into the entire watersheds. They model how the river is connected to the underground sewer network and eventually the lake, the sea, or whatever the local water system looks like. This is the foundation of how we start working with water in relation to especially our urban environments. And the notion of what we want to talk about when we talk about resilience in relation to water is actually coming a little bit back to the natural water cycle that was here long before we paved everything and created parking lots across the city. So it's this idea that water has somewhere to go, whether it can infiltrate or whether we have the space for rainwater when it rains a lot. Maybe we also want to capture it, harvest it for later. This is called the cloudburst approach, inspired by Copenhagen. Cloudburst means a sudden downpour. Maybe some of you have heard it. I don't know if it actually does exist in English, but at least it's an attempt to create a Danish word in English. So you'll hear me say that a lot, but it is just an extreme rainfall event. Yes. Water knows no boundaries. So as we look at water, we look beyond whatever site boundary we've been given, also beyond the city boundary, because you know your water regimes go way beyond your city. And we need to understand these exchanges. We need to know where was water before we paved everything, wetlands, rivers, streams. We also need to understand where does water accumulate, so where would it like to flow when it rains a lot in the city. We want to know where it floods, and then we want to work with the terrain, because we know the most sustainable solutions are the ones where the terrain are in favor of us. Otherwise, we'll be putting in a lot of pumps, etc., which is not what we want in relation to sustainable solutions. So over 10 years ago, we started working with the city of Copenhagen on this. Some of you might have heard that they have had a large cloudburst event in 2011. It was very expensive. And very quickly the city came together, and not only the engineers, a lot of different disciplines sat down and said, okay, we have a service level for everyday rainwater. We also need one for when there's an extreme. In this case, they decided on a 1 in a 100-year event. They're actually going a little bit backwards on that, but that's where they started. Then they divided the city into 7 catchments, and for each of those catchments, and these are terrain-based catchments, they did a master plan of saying, okay, we want mostly terrain-based, multi-purpose, nature-based solutions to actually handle our stormwater. And it needs to do a lot more than that, and I'll come back to that. But this is really where we sort of first went through this entire process multiple times with the city, and this is what inspired us to go out in the world and say, hey, we worked with the city of Copenhagen on this. It actually kind of works other places too. So based on that, we sort of simplified a 4-step approach to how you can work with climate resilience, regardless of its stormwater, storm surges from the sea, extreme temperatures. This is a universal process. And it helps us in also communicating what you need to do and in which sequence. It's also important to say that we'll never finish adapting to the future. So this is not one time you go through it and then you're done. This is something you'll have to do many times, and every time we go through it, we've hopefully learned something new, and we do it slightly more better or slightly more pointed towards the future. So in step 1, it's very much about knowing what are the hazards, how will they manifest in the future, what does climate change look like in Bucharest specifically, what are the vulnerabilities in Bucharest towards either flooding or extreme heat or something else. Vulnerabilities are very tied to the individual hazard that you're looking at, so we have to be sensitive to that. We need to know how everything is connected so we can understand these cascading consequences of when something fails. So this is all about documenting climate risks, both spatially and over time. And we really want to work together across disciplines with stakeholders, communities, whoever needs to be at the table should be there to create a long-term vision. Yes, we want to reduce our climate risk, but what do we also want to do with this investment? And from there, we build the first sort of plans. We test it, we make sure, is it doing what it's supposed to do? Are we satisfied with the outcomes? What does the financial pieces say? And we go back and forth. And in the end, when we have a satisfactory outcome, then we do sort of an investment plan and resilience pathways to understand when do we protect to which level and when do we have to finance which pieces. Also to make sure we have this sustained investment over time, also when there's political shifts. And I'll just say a few words about each of these steps. So the first step, I'm sure many of you are familiar with, is when we model the climate risk. We do that in accordance to the IPCC. So we look obviously at the hazard, the probability of something happening, and take that into consideration. We look at which assets can actually be exposed. When is something exposed? In Bucharest, maybe it's at 20 centimeters of water. Maybe in the US, it's a lot higher because the curb is higher or something like that. So we really have to go in and look at the urban form of the city. And mentioned vulnerabilities, too often overlooked. This is really where you can make a difference. So my recommendation is also to really keep and focus on the vulnerabilities specific to this place here in the city, because they manifest differently. When we talk about vulnerabilities, we're not only talking about critical infrastructure, we're also talking about critical infrastructure. We're also talking about some of the ecosystems that maybe sustain your food systems here, or biodiversity. We're talking about the urban flows, so the urban systems. This is also supply chains, etc., what you're dependent on importing, exporting. And then obviously community vulnerabilities. Some communities simply are more vulnerable than others. And there is just this piece of inequity that's at the heart of working with climate resilience that we work a lot to bring focus to. We call it climate justice. I'm sure there are many other words that could also describe it. We want to make sure that everyone that works in this space understands that climate-related hazards are not evenly distributed. You know that some areas are more affected than others, right? We also know that the presence of entities that could be affected, communities, infrastructure, is also not evenly distributed. So that some communities, some infrastructure is more sensitive and will be more affected by a possible event than others. And then we also know that not everyone has the same adaptive capacity to prepare or respond if something happens. So we actually have to work across all these four when we talk about climate resilience. And too many efforts focus mostly on the exposure piece. Okay, here's some water, or here's high temperatures, let's reduce it. Okay, well, we could also work in the other spectrum of it. This is typically the outcomes that we deliver to clients around the world. We show them spatially across your city or district, where do you actually see these high-risk areas? And then we also tell them, if you do nothing now, it's not going to be no cost. It's quite expensive to do absolutely nothing. Because of climate change, your risk will go up over time. So we can show them what this looks like. When we have that foundation, we go into a co-creative process with communities, with stakeholders, whoever needs to be there. And this is where we develop the visions. Every place is unique, so even though we have this universal process, the conversations have to happen very locally to make sure that whatever strategies or designs we propose are very much tailored to the needs of the individuals living here or to the communities. It looks different every time we go into a new area. There's different needs. One area has a lot of schools, so the schools are actually the very most important actors to include. Others, it could be the churches or industry, whatever. So how we design with communities and with the city stakeholders is unique every time. And from that step, we get typically some kind of a master plan, you can say. This is focusing on stormwater, but it could also have been focusing on a different hazard. It is showing the connectivity of suggested interventions. For this one, it shows where can we convey water, where can we store water temporarily. Many of these will also have temperature hotspots. So the potential areas for storing water is also where we would do a cooling center for heat days and so on. Water, as you probably know, has a very strong cooling effect. So how can we bring that up and actually also in that develop our extreme heat strategies. Then when you dive into individual projects, so I said in Copenhagen they had over 300 projects identified as part of their master plans. Each of these master plans will have a number of projects that work together and in isolation. In Copenhagen, this was one of the first ones installed. It's a lowered soccer field. 99% of the time, it's just a soccer field. Maybe 1% of the time, maybe even less, it's a stormwater retention basin. And we want to make sure that we do like this, because you put 3 million euros or whatever into this design, and what if it never floods? You want to make sure it has a different function, so that those investments that we put into climate resilience actually provide value every single second. This is probably not that's not the most nature-based thing we did. It was also one of the first ones we did. So in relation to sustainability and co-benefits and everything, we're looking a lot more into designing with nature. This is a project we did in Singapore. We know that nature has its own right in the world, but also its own value. It improves our mental health, it reduces the temperatures, it creates space for water. So increasingly we are looking a lot more to the nature-based side of our interventions. a lot of our clients are like, well, can you put a number? Because I know my pipe has no maintenance at all, so I need to know like what is the value of actually doing nature-based design over typical gray infrastructure. And we got that question a lot. So over the last decade, we developed a tool we call NBS Value that quantifies some of the benefits that we see and that we can quantify when we use these blue-green infrastructure and multi-purpose designs. This can be something like reducing speed and reducing or increasing traffic safety, reducing air pollution, lowering temperatures, increased habitat, and so on, that we can then quantify and say, okay, yes, you could do a pipe, but you could also do a rain garden and a new park or something like that, and then you get all these benefits. Because for most clients, we have to do a cost-benefit analysis in the end to show them this is a sound investment. And many people think that climate adaptation and climate resilience is just a cost. It's actually not. It's an investment if you do it right. So in our cost-benefit analysis, we really also want to make sure that we include the added value, or the co-benefits we sometimes call them. So this is the added value to community. One of the cities that we worked really closely with, also just getting different stakeholders together, was New York City. And we did this executive summary summing up the process that we went through them, because it was the first time that you had their transport agency in the same room as the parks agency and the same room as the water utility agency, and they had to work together to figure out, okay, if we're all of a sudden not handling stormwater just in the pipes, but also in the streets and in the parks, what does it look like, who's going to finance it, and all of this. So we did this study with them to show what is the process actually that you have to go through, and how can you quantify the cost, the benefits, the co-benefits, to actually figure out, show that it's a good investment, but also figure out who pays for what, because that's a continuous conversation. And then later we also did a citywide assessment saying, okay, what if New York City implemented a blue-green infrastructure network across the entire city, designed just to a 10-year event, not even one of the really big ones? What does that look like? And that study, obviously, it's a high-level study, but it showed that for every $1 you invest in this blue-green infrastructure network, you get $2 back. And this was pretty strong in saying, again, it's not a cost to actually invest in this. It is an investment. There is a return on investment. And we really have to change the conversation about, if you do nothing, then you save a lot of money. No, you don't. It's going to be really, really expensive doing absolutely nothing. Yes. This is a universal process, but every time we apply it in a new place, it takes a new form, it has new conversations. Some conversation pop up no matter where you are, like parking and maintenance. But then again, when we then go through it, all the designs have their own unique expressions. They're designed to this particular culture, the needs of the communities, the urban form of the city. So when you go through something like this, it would look very unique also to Bucharest. And then I brought a few examples of the implemented projects that we have in Ramboll. This one is from Copenhagen. It's one of the 300 projects that were identified as part of the overall Cloudburst master plan. It's a low-income community in Copenhagen. It's actually the most famous, and not for positive reasons, public housing area. And it was a larger urban renewal. And the centerpiece was a park that no one would ever go into. It was not nice, and it felt unsafe. And today it's a destination for the entire city to come here. There's the skating rink. But there's also a zoo, there's mini golf, there's different water plays and features throughout the park that's much longer than this picture actually shows. And the financing of this park and the redoing of this park is financed through water rates. But then working with the municipality, you could also add these additional features. And kids come here every day, sports clubs use it. It's super popular. This is another one in the old part of Copenhagen where we have very little space to work with. We have a lowered soccer field in like a courtyard area. And again, 99% of the time, it's just a soccer field. But then you see those little red thingies. So when it rains up to a certain threshold, they can activate this buffer to store stormwater, and you'll see the water come out of those red overflow features and slowly fill up to whatever level. And then within 24 hours, it's emptied. And there will be some maintenance of just cleaning it up. Yeah. Much bigger. In Singapore, also slightly older. A drainage canal that was once a river was renaturalized over some years, working with the communities. Actually, also the university had a huge piece in this. They have different sort of test beds here, where the students can also see how you can treat water differently and so on. If you go there today, there's always a class of something going on. So this is a really good story of how you can then bring a concrete stream back to its not original state, but maybe closer. Give it more space. In the rainy season, this river is huge. It's taking up a lot more space than what you see in this picture. Then they have little red markers, and then you know when the water levels go up to those red markers, it's time to actually leave the park. So they have all these features in there, but it is just, again, this idea of bringing space back to water, but also allowing people to actually come close to the water. Thank you for having me.